The abandoned theme park. Lena and her friends decided to explore the abandoned theme park on the outskirts of town. It had been closed for years, a victim of multiple tragic accidents that had occurred there. The townsfolk spoke of it in hushed tones, claiming that the park was cursed. But to Lena and her friends, it was just another adventure. As they entered the park, the eerie silence was unsettling. The once colorful rides were now rusted and decaying, overtaken by nature. The wind whistled through the empty roller coaster tracks, creating an almost mournful sound. They joked and laughed as they walked through the park, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They reached the old funhouse, its entrance dark and foreboding. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the mirrors that lined the walls were cracked and distorted. Lena felt a chill run down her spine as she stared into one of the mirrors. Her reflection seemed off, as if it was watching her with malevolent intent. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as they tried to find their way out, but the funhouse was like a maze. Lena's friends' voices grew distant, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. She turned a corner and saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, a clown with a twisted, menacing grin. Lena's scream echoed through the funhouse as she turned and ran. She could hear the clown's footsteps behind her, growing closer with each passing second. She burst through the exit and into the night, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she turned around, she realized she was alone. Her friends were nowhere to be found. The next morning, the police found Lena wandering the streets, disoriented and in shock. The theme park was searched, but there was no sign of her friends. The park was sealed off for good, but Lena knew that the evil inside the funhouse was still there, waiting for its next victims. The midnight shift. Evan had just started his new job as a night security guard at a local warehouse. The pay was decent and the work was easy. All he had to do was monitor the security cameras and make a few rounds throughout the night. But from the moment he stepped into the building, he felt uneasy. The warehouse was massive, with rows upon rows of towering shelves filled with boxes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. Evan's footsteps echoed through the empty space as he made his rounds, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. The security cameras would flicker occasionally, showing brief, distorted images that made his skin crawl. One night, as he was making his rounds, he heard a faint whisper. He stopped in his tracks, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, but he couldn't make out the words. It seemed to be coming from the back of the warehouse, where the lights were dimmer. With his heart pounding in his chest, Evan made his way toward the source of the sound. As he rounded the corner, his flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. The whispering stopped, and all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. Suddenly, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He spun around, his flashlight flickering back to life, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and he sprinted back to the security office, locking the door behind him. He watched the security monitors in terror, but the cameras were filled with static. The next morning, Evan quit his job and never looked back. But every night, he would wake up at exactly midnight, hearing the faint whispers echoing in his mind, a reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked in the darkness of that warehouse. The forest. Emily had always loved hiking. The serenity of the forest brought her peace, a welcome escape from the chaos of daily life. But there was one trail she had never dared to explore, one that the locals warned was cursed. The old creek trail was said to be haunted, and those who ventured too far never returned. One autumn day, curiosity got the better of Emily. Ignoring the warnings, she set off down the old creek trail. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were the crunching of leaves beneath her boots and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As she ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and denser, blocking out the sunlight. The air grew colder, and the atmosphere felt oppressive. Emily tried to shake off the unease that was creeping up on her, but the further she walked, the stronger it became. She soon found herself in a clearing, where the remains of an old cabin stood. The roof had collapsed, and the windows were shattered. Emily felt a strange pull toward the cabin, as if something was calling her. She stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. As she explored the cabin, she found an old journal lying on a table, its pages yellowed with age. The entries spoke of a man who had lost his mind, claiming to hear voices in the forest, telling him to do unspeakable things. Suddenly, Emily felt a presence behind her. She turned around, but there was nothing there. The air grew colder, and she could see her breath. The whispers started, low and unintelligible at first, but growing louder and more frantic. She backed away, her heart racing, but the door slammed shut, trapping her inside. The whispers turned into screams, and Emily felt hands grabbing at her, pulling her toward the darkness. She fought back, but the force was too strong. The last thing she saw was a figure standing in the shadows, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Days later, search parties found the old creek trail deserted. Emily's backpack was discovered near the cabin, but there was no sign of her. The trail was closed off, and the locals whispered that the forest had claimed another victim. The basement. Mark had always been fascinated by the house at the end of the street. It was old, abandoned, and rumored to be haunted. But when the new owners moved in and began renovating the place, he couldn't resist the urge to explore it. One evening, Mark noticed that the workers had left for the day, leaving the house unguarded. He snuck in through the back door, his heart racing with excitement. The interior was just as eerie as the exterior, with peeling wallpaper and creaking floorboards. As he wandered through the house, he found a door that led to the basement. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light was coming from within. Mark hesitated for a moment before descending the stairs, his curiosity getting the better of him. The basement was cold and damp, with a musty smell that made him wrinkle his nose. The light was coming from an old lantern hanging from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows across the room. In the corner, he noticed a large, old-fashioned chest. Mark approached the chest, feeling a strange sense of dread. As he opened it, a wave of cold air washed over him, and he recoiled in horror. Inside the chest were old, tattered clothes, stained with something dark. But what caught his attention was a small, blood-stained doll lying on top. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, and the room was plunged into darkness. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he fumbled for his flashlight. When he finally managed to turn it on, the beam illuminated a figure standing in the corner. A woman, her face twisted in pain and rage. She began to move toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. Mark backed away, his hands trembling, but he tripped over something on the floor. As he scrambled to his feet, the figure lunged at him, her hands reaching out to grab him. Mark's scream echoed through the basement as he was dragged into the darkness. The next morning, the workers found the basement door locked from the inside. When they finally managed to open it, they found Mark lying unconscious on the floor, his face pale and his body trembling. He never spoke of what happened that night, but he moved away from the neighborhood soon after. The house was abandoned once again, and the basement door was sealed shut, never to be opened again.